Oopsie Daisy. And I didn't mean to start this whole thing laughing, but I cannot even take myself seriously. As I sat down and pressed record, I had a picture of myself. You know how batters, when they come up to bat, they have a walk-up song, and it's just like this hype music that plays as they're getting ready. And all I could picture is me sitting down in this chair, and the song, Allow Me to Reintroduce Myself, starts playing. And I'm laughing because it's ridiculous, but it's also really real. And I feel like that's where we're at right now, is that I kind of need to reintroduce myself a little bit. Because if you've been keeping up with the Kardashians over here, you've noticed that there has not been a new Oopsie Daisy episode in 3 months. And it was not a planned break. There was never supposed to be seasons of this podcast. I was just going to get on that podcast pony and ride into the sunset forever until I die. But God had other plans. And looking back, it kind of started at the very beginning of this journey when I made this noble declaration to God that it was real stupid on my part, if you ask me. But I kind of said in passing, God, I'm not ever going to podcast about something that I haven't lived through. And I don't know if I thought I was being just this like really good Christian or if I was really serious about it, but it seemed like something, like a really great idea. Like if you are going to tell these stories of God and talk about faith lessons and finding his fingerprints all over your life, well, you better be living that life and be able to talk from your experience or be able to interview and sit down and have conversations with people that have lived that. So I think in theory it was a great idea until we got to season 1, episode 16 and talking about the wilderness. At the beginning of the summer, I had been really studying the Israelites' journey out of slavery in Egypt into their 40 years of wandering in the wilderness and their behavior there, and then entering the promised land. And I got this 2-part message dropped on me. This whole replacing the slave mindsets that make you want to stay in Egypt and stay in the past and stay comfortable. And that was great, grand, and wonderful because I've already lived that, that idea of looking back and not wanting to move forward and just being gripped in fear about new paths and new adventures that God has for you. And I feel like I've dealt with that in my life enough that I had the well-developed vocabulary to speak to you about it on part 1 of this episode. And then there was this screeching halt as the second part of the message came up, and I was going to record that baby. Bam, bam, release him to you. A 1-2 punch was going to be great. It was going to be beautiful. It was going to be impactful and everything like that. And then God was like, nope, no thanks. You sit down now. I didn't realize it was him sitting me down until about 3 months after it happened. So roughly 3 weeks ago is when I realized, oh, hey, I'm not just completely being a loser this summer and not chasing after my dream. This is a God-ordained break that he has really reoriented, refocused, recentered, reprogrammed me. And this is what's hard. I'm going to tell you right now, this is a hard space to show up in. It's very vulnerable, which is super awkward to put your whole life and your thoughts and your heart on the internet for people to hear. It's weird and it's kind of dumb, it feels like sometimes. But when you feel called to it, there's not really a choice. And so I tried to set it aside early this summer and just live my life. Just be with my kids, do my job, be a wife, hang out with friends, just like live my best this summer. But in the back of my head this whole time, there was this like, hey, you have a podcast. Hey, you have a podcast. When's your next message? When's your next message? And so I spent a lot of time really just beating myself up about not coming on here. Well, little did I know that God was actually going to use that time to let me live part 2 of this wilderness message. So now that I've actually lived this message enough that God has walked me through it and I have felt it and breathed it and cried it and journaled about it and just really struggled with this, now God's like, and yes, now you go release this and your experience into the world. So welcome to Winning the Wilderness Part 2, slightly belated. If you want, it's not super necessary. This will stand alone and it'll be great just by itself. But if you want the full perspective and context of this message, go back to the end of season 1 and listen to episode 16, which is Winning the Wilderness Part 1. In episode 1, I introduced 3 main purposes that God has in our wilderness. And just to context it a little bit, the Israelites had been enslaved by the Egyptians for 400 years. God sent Moses as a deliverer. There was the Exodus, the leaving of Egypt, the parting of the Red Sea. And then these Israelites, this huge group of people, get into the wilderness and basically just kind of lose it a little bit. They're up, they're down, they trust God, they don't trust God, they're obeying him, they're not obeying him, they're moving and making progress, they're circling back around because they're scared of their enemies. It's just this wild journey. And so I introduced 3 purposes of the wilderness in that first part of this episode. So the first one is reprogramming. God let them wander into the wilderness a little bit to erase the old mindsets that were keeping them stuck. They could not enter the promised land thinking as slaves. They were generations, 400 years of slavery. I mean, that beats some lies and some nasty habits and just ways of viewing yourself and the world and others and God, because God had been letting them sit for 400 years. It leaves you with kind of this crappy mental and emotional baggage that he had to reprogram them in the wilderness. The second purpose of the wilderness, and I got to read this. Where's my glasses? Here we go. Preparation and perspective. He needed to prepare these people and give them the right focus that they needed for their new season. Because this is a new place, new people, new challenges, new situations, new hardships, and these people were not prepared for this at all. So today we are going to talk about that part 2, which is the qualities that God was developing in his people on their way to the promised land. Okay, we're going to camp in the book of Numbers today, which is sort of punny if you think about it, because in a lot of the book of Numbers, the Israelites are camping in the wilderness. We're really going to stick in the book of Numbers, which in Hebrew it's called Bamidbar. Who knows? With the pronunciation, you guys, you just get it the way my brain reads it. Welcome to my world. Right or wrong, let's go with it, okay? So the Hebrew word Bamidbar actually means in the desert. So it's a really perfect book to kind of describe where they were at, just in this desert season, this dry season, wandering, lost. And it's a really great book for you to read if you feel like you're in a desert season too, where you're just stuck and dry and trying to figure out what's going on, and you kind of are lost and you just aren't quite sure what's going on. Numbers, that's for you. We're going to talk about what God did with his people in the book of Numbers and the qualities he developed in them to have them progress to the promised land. After the Israelites leave Egypt, God could have let them, it wasn't as far of a journey as we think it is. He could have let them leave right from Egypt and walk right into the promised land. He had told them, you're going to have to subdue some enemies. You're going to have to conquer the land. It's going to be a battle, but I will be with you and you will win it. Victory is assured. It's all yours. Just go get it. But he didn't let them. He had them go kind of this wandering route because he was preparing them and developing some characteristics in them that they needed. So first of all, in order to progress into the promised land, God's people had to be numbered or counted. So I'm going to tell you what this is, and then we're going to talk about why it's important. Right off the bat, in Numbers 1, the Lord speaks to Moses in the tabernacle, and he says, from the whole community of Israel, record the names of all the warriors by their clans and families. List all the men 20 years old or older who are able to go to war. You and Aaron must register the troops. Okay, and so then he goes on to list a lot of names and a lot of numbers and a lot of people. And so he numbers everybody, and they spend this time making a list of their people. Okay, so why is this important? Who cares? Head in there. You got a lot of people. We're talking probably $2 million. Not dollars. They didn't probably have that. Shekels maybe. But you have 2 million people in the wilderness with you. I think no matter what, you're probably good to take the promised land, right? But God stopped them and said, no, number my people. And here's what he was doing. He was preparing them for battle. Okay? And letting them know that each tribe was important. Each name, each family was numbered, counted, seen, valued, and these people had a job. He was telling them, hey, you're able to fight. You have a purpose. I need you to partner with me on this journey in building this kingdom, in conquering this promised land. You have a role. I see you. I value you. You matter to this purpose. And I think when we wander in a wilderness season, when we're between kind of the old and the new, or we're not quite sure where we're going next, it is so easy to get lost when we feel like we don't have a place, we don't have a role, we don't have a purpose. And so it's really easy to forget that you matter. But God wants to reprogram that mindset because you can't walk into your next season thinking like that. God wants to partner with you, and you have a huge role, an important role to play that nobody else can play. And He wants to partner with you for a purpose to advance the kingdom, to shine His glory. And if you don't understand that and embrace that, you're not going to move forward. You're going to quit because you're scared. It's going to be this deep insecurity that you have that whispers to you that what you bring to the table isn't valuable and it doesn't matter and it's not impactful. And those things simply aren't true. In fact, in Luke 1:27, it says, God numbered the very hairs on your head. So not only does He see you and value you and has put a purpose in you, He literally knows the numbers of hairs on your head. So I don't know if He divides mine by grays and darks, but He knows all of them, no matter what color they are. He numbered His people. He was organizing His troops. He was ordering them. He was showing them, you matter. You have a purpose. There is a reason you're here. Another reason why He did that was to remind His people of His faithfulness. Hear me out. Like, what does a census and what does like a list of people and numbers have to do? You have to think back to Abraham. So Abraham, if you remember that story, they had no children, and God had promised him to be the father of many nations. And his wife was super old, like menopausal to the max. I think they were maybe 90, 100. I mean, shrivelly eggs, ovaries, and other baby-making parts probably didn't work quite as well. But God did a miracle and allowed Abraham to have a child. Technically, he had two, but he had the first one with the servant, which was against God's will. He did end up having Isaac, and Isaac had two kids, and Isaac's kid had a couple of kids. And so 3 generations after Abraham, there was 12 people in that family, which is like, oh, great. We were never even supposed to have one baby. But the promise that God made to Abraham before anything looked like it was going to happen in the natural, in reality, God spoke to him and said, this is what I'm going to do for you, and you're going to know it's me. I'm going to make you the father of many nations. Your children and your family will be countless as the stars in the sky and the sand on the beach. That's going to be how many kids you have. And so after 3 generations, when there's 12, it's like, okay, thanks God, but I can basically count these on 2 hands. So, you got any more coming? And so a few generations later, there is 2 million people wandering in the wilderness. If you look historically, this was not this ragtag, bag, hoarding, carrying group of Israelites. I mean, this is 2 million men, women, and children that are all descendants of Abraham. And so when Moses and Aaron took this census, and everybody looked around and realized as they were standing in these census lines and marking their names down, everybody is being reminded afresh. God promised this. He did. Before we saw any of it, before we saw a shred of evidence of it, before there was even a whiff of this actually happening, God told him He was going to be faithful. And now they're seeing the fruit of that promise. And so God knew that where He was taking them, they had to be reminded, you guys, I am faithful. You can trust me. You can obey me because I'm going to come through for you. Everything I say is truth. If you will only trust me, you will move forward. There will be no progress without trusting me. And I think that is so real and so true for us, because how many times do we not move out of a weird in-between dry wilderness season because we don't trust where God is leading us? Or we have so many questions about, why is it this way? God, are you going to show up? If I move, is something bad going to happen? It's so much easier for us to stay stuck in our current situation and choose to stay with what's comfortable because we lack a real trust in the faithfulness of God. And we have a hard time grasping his promises in our scared little fingers and saying, I'm going to hang on to this and I'm going to make some moves that might not make sense. They might be scary, but I feel you here, God, and I'm running after it because I have seen your faithfulness. Here's what I love about the Bible. What was true for them then has to be true for us now because God is unchanging. He can't change. He is good. He is faithful. His promises endure forever. That's scripture. Look that up. I don't have the verse reference on top of my head, but it's there. He doesn't change. And so the way that he showed up for the Israelites and that deep, deep commitment he had to bringing them forward through this time, he has the same thing for you. And he wants to guide you through this season. So I think that being numbered and seen and given a purpose and being able to hang on to those promises of his faithfulness, those things are wonderful. But that isn't really where the action part is. And so in order to enter into this next season, in order to enter into the promised land, they had to move. They actually had to physically take steps and act. And this is where things can go wonky. You can have your purpose, see it clearly, understand your value, and really deeply believe those promises of God and make progress forward and still do it the wrong way. Let me explain. Let's check out the end of Numbers 1 and the beginning of Numbers 2. And we're going to talk about perspective and how important your perspective and your focus is as you begin to walk out your purpose, as you begin to walk out the promises of God. Your perspective deeply, deeply matters. But before we do that, we have to talk about the tabernacle though. So back in Mount Sinai, after they had left Egypt, they camped at Mount Sinai for about a year before they headed even closer to the promised land. And during that time, the Lord instructed them to build the tabernacle, which was this place of meeting with him, this place of worship. It was like a portable temple. When I say it that way, why did I think of a porta potty? That's awful. It's probably really blasphemous. But it was this portable place of worship, place of meeting with the Lord. And it actually ended up to be the place where the Lord's presence was dwelling among them in their camp. And so they had instructions to build this. And this was no tiny little ramshackle thing. I mean, this was a big deal. They had many builders. It had kind of a wall surrounding it, and you had like the inner place of meeting, and then there was the curtains, and the Ark of the Covenant was in there. And so it was just like this big deal. So once they finish it, according to his specifications and his instructions, the Lord's presence in the form of his cloud, it says the Lord's glory filled the tabernacle. So his actual manifest presence in the form of a cloud came to rest on the tabernacle. And as long as his presence was there, they would stay there and they would camp and they would worship and they would work and they would just live their daily lives. But they knew it was time to go when that cloud would lift and it would leave. And so they packed up the tabernacle, and the Levites had a job to carry it, and other people had a job to carry the tent poles, and some people had to carry the curtains. This organized approach to who was dealing with which part of the tabernacle, and they tore the sucker down, moved to the next place, and put it back up again where the Lord told them to put it back up. So step by step along this journey, the Lord's presence dwelt with them in the tabernacle. Let me read the end of Numbers 1 to you. And I want you to listen to this, how organized this is. It says, put the Levites, the priestly tribe, put the Levites in charge of the tabernacle of the covenant, along with the furnishings and the equipment. They must carry the tabernacle and all its furnishings as you travel, and they must take care of it and camp around it. Whenever it's time for the tabernacle to move, the Levites will take it down. When it's time to stop, they'll set it up again. But any unauthorized person who goes too near the tabernacle must be put to death. Continuing on into Numbers 2:1, it says, when the Israelites set up camp, each tribe will be assigned its own area. The tribal divisions will camp beneath their family banners on all 4 sides of the tabernacle. So here's what we see. There's a lot of organization going on here. We've got specific jobs. We have specific materials people are supposed to take. We have specific camping areas. This is a very organized and ordered way to move. It's an ordered way to live, to sleep. And this is what I love about God. This is not organization just simply for the sake of organization. God knew that they had a purpose and that in order to walk into their purpose in this next season, they had to follow his presence. And he gifted this order and organization to them so that they could follow his presence calmly, with peace, with order, with not chaos, with confusion. He wanted them to be able to move quickly when the cloud lifted, and he wanted them to be able to find their place quickly when the cloud settled at the next area that they were supposed to camp. So this is a gift, and this is what the Lord wants to do also in your wilderness season. He wants to give you organization, and he wants to give you order, and he wants to help you place things in your life so that you can make moves left, right, forward, sideways, up, down to follow his presence in a way that doesn't bring chaos to your life. And I lived this. I really did, you guys. This very much was a hard summer for me because I had felt a lot of confusion and chaos in how I was supposed to approach this podcast and organize my own life to be a wife, a mom, a friend, an employee of my full-time job, and still steward this. So I'm in this weird in-between season of doing all of this, and I was getting very burdened. Heavily burdened, exhausted. I had no idea how to organize myself moving forward. And I saw this and I studied this, and it just really hit me that God is for you. He wants movement from you. He wants purposeful action towards your next season, but he wants you to do it in an orderly way so that it blesses you. He doesn't want you up at 3:30 in the morning stressing about, I got to do this next and I got to do this next and I'm so confused and I don't know the right answer. He doesn't want that for you. He's got answers for you. He's got strategy for you. He's got a battle plan for you. Your next season and your promised land and whatever you're walking into, it's not going to be easy. It's absolutely going to be a battle in some aspects. And he wants to order and organize you and provide you those things so you can walk in confidently and with peace. I want to talk about perspective and recentering ourselves a little bit. We talked about the tabernacle, and I read you these same 2 verses. But this time I want you to pay attention to where the tabernacle is in the story. Remember, the tabernacle is God's presence dwelling with them. It's how they were led. It's how they were guided. Listen where the tabernacle is. Numbers 1 verse 50. Put the Levites in charge of the tabernacle of the covenant, along with the furnishings and equipment. They must carry the tabernacle and all its furnishings as you travel, and they must take care of it and camp around it. Listen to Numbers 2:1. When the Israelites set up camp, each tribe will be assigned their own area. The tribal divisions will camp beneath their family banners on all 4 sides of the tabernacle. Okay, so where's the tabernacle and all that? In the middle. He had the Levites camping around it. He had all the divisions of the tribes camped on all 4 sides of the tabernacle. He put the tabernacle in the center. You probably already made the logical jump with where I'm going with this. The tabernacle God's presence. He had them camped around it. He had them focused on it. He made sure that all the family divisions were on all four sides of the tabernacle. And you know what? When he sent them out to march too, he put two tribes first. Then he plopped the tabernacle that was being carried, and then he put two tribes after. So even as they moved, he put his presence in the center of everything, right smack dab in the middle. And let me tell you what, this is a huge part of our wilderness, is learning how to reorient ourselves, learning how to build our lives, our camps, our families, our movements centered around God, around his presence, his priority, our relationship with him. And it's unbelievably important because as you head into your next season or where God has you going next, he's not going to let you go there without him. I mean, you might try and you might actually get there physically, but your heart's not going to be there. You're not going to be able to do it well with peace, without chaos, confusion. It's going to be a heavy weight to carry. It's going to be chaotic. It's going to be really, really hard. God knew that his people needed to spend this time in the wilderness learning to center their lives around him and around his presence and look to his presence for guidance. You would think these people that were battle ready and counted and organized and they could move well and they understood the promises of God and they felt their purpose, that God was like, yep, go in, you're good, you're ready to go. But he sent them right up to the edge of the promised land, and they sent spies in, and the spies came back and were like, there's giants in the land. We are like ants compared to them. We can't take it. It's too hard. There was only 2 faithful men in that whole group of spies that were like, you guys, God promised to be with us. We got to do this. We got to move forward. And so finally then, after God's mercy through all of their complaining, their grumbling, their trying to go backwards in the wilderness, God had showed them mercy the whole time. And finally he says to them, you know what? There are consequences now. For your unbelief, this whole generation is not going to enter the promised land. You will all die in the wilderness, and only your children will enter the promised land. And that doesn't make sense to us because we're like, God is good. God is, God will let you do what you need to do and he'll make it happen. But here's the reality. There are consequences to your choices and to your unbelief. God was good because he knew that if he sent that group of people, that group of adults into the promised land with that kind of unbelief and with that kind of behavior that was always looking to either rebel or to avoid hard things or to turn to other things besides God, he knew that when he sent them into that promised land that they would not be able to take it. So he said, you know what? You're all going to die in the wilderness. And he basically sentenced them to this exile for 40 years. And that group of adults all died, all of them, except Joshua and Caleb, the 2 faithful spies. And it wasn't until 40 years later, when that younger generation had grown up, that he allowed those people to enter the promised land. And this blew my mind a little bit, you guys. I always feel like there's more chances. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not really ready yet to step into this. I'm really afraid. And so I don't want to write that book, or I don't want to start that business, or, I don't want to shine my light. I don't want to speak out. I don't want to do this yet. I'm scared. I'm not ready. I'm uncomfortable. But there are consequences for this. And so here's what I'll tell you. God will allow you to walk through the wilderness. He will, because there's a purpose, and it's a good purpose. It's needed. It's not just for him being a nasty and enjoying the show up there. You need the wilderness to grow, to recenter, to find purpose, to believe. You need the wilderness for this. And so he's going to let you walk through it, but the length of it depends on you. So there are basically 3 outcomes to our wilderness season. The first one is live there and camp there, all right? So this is what the Israelites did. They got stuck. They camped out there for a very, very long time, longer than necessary. Why? Because they were clinging to the past. They disobeyed God. They were complaining, and they were full of unbelief and mistrust towards the promises of God. And so they got stuck there. The second choice is to die there, literally. Letting your fear and your insecurity and your complaining and your not trusting God, that actually could cause you to die in your wilderness. I'm not talking about God's going to strike you down when you're really young because of this. No, I'm not saying that. But I'm saying it is possible to get stuck in one season of your life, in one mindset, in one feeling, in one sin, and not ever be able to move past it. And it sticks with you your whole life. And you never really get to experience this amazing promised land, this next season, this great adventure that God has for you, because you have chosen to die in the wilderness. So you can live there and get stuck. You can die there. The third thing is you can move through it. You can let the wilderness do what it needs to do in your life. You can trust that it's a temporary time, that God is walking you through it for a purpose. You can trust what He's doing in your life. And you can actually partner with Him on your progress instead of fighting it. And when you choose to do that, you move faster through your wilderness. That's when you really win your wilderness, is when you lean into this. Okay, God, I know you're doing something. And I know your word promises that weeping may last for a night, but joy comes in the morning. And so this feeling, this season, this ick, this gross that I'm stuck in, it's not forever unless I choose it to be. He's got a dawn coming for you. And all you have to do is partner with Him and really allow yourself to be open to develop the characteristics that He needs you to have in order to move you forward. I mean, truly, we could just sum up the entire book of Numbers and just every life lesson like this. And I wrote it down, and I'm going to read it so I don't screw this up. The whole message of the book of Numbers is this: God's people, we only progress forward by trusting Him and His promises and by obeying His word. So I'm going to encourage you to quit trying to fight your way into your next season. Quit trying to chop doors down with axes, and quit trying to push so hard to get out of where you are. You're not stuck. You're being developed, you're being positioned, you're being organized, and you're being refocused right now. And that's okay. It's a temporary season if you let it be. There is more for you on the other side. If this message really sat deep in your heart and there was somebody on your mind as you were listening, will you send it to them? I really truly believe that we have to stop hoarding revelation, and we have to stop hoarding information for ourselves, and we really need to share it and spread it. So if there's somebody that God laid on your heart while you were listening to this, share it with them. We'll talk to you next time. See you later. Thanks for listening to Oopsie Daisy. Be sure to follow us on social media at the Oopsie Daisy Girl, or visit my website, amandaherdler.com. That's Amanda, HIRDLER.com.